Adam Elmasri is a YouTube host. He's got two channels, one in Arabic and one in English. His website describes him as an Australian Egyptian freethinker, speaker, human rights activist, author, and content creator. He has been on the debate scene. He founded Faith Crisis Australia, and this is an organization to help ex-Christians as they navigate their post-religious life. His most recent book is titled How Did Christianity Begin? Really, published in Arabic. He is a registered therapist with the Secular Therapy Project, and he also serves recoveringfromreligion.org. Adam, I guess we don't have time to talk now that I've given your resume for about 45 minutes at the beginning of the conversation. Adam, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction.
I guess you're all over the place, and I mean this in a good way on your resume. I'm seeing, all right, I got Australian, I got Egyptian, I got Islam, I got Christianity. I just see this sort of convergence, and it makes me like pause at the beginning. Where do I start? Can we start with Islam? Would that be all right with you, Adam?
Absolutely.
So let's start with terms. I hear Muslims, I see Muslims online. They quote from the Quran and the Hadith. What's the difference? Does Islam have like two Bibles?
The Quran is the holy book. Think about it as you think of the Bible. It is the official holy book that was apparently revealed from God. The Hadith is the sayings that are attributed to the Prophet. So most of the Hadith come through a chain of narratives. Think of the disciples of Christ. It's in the same sense that anything the disciples of Christ said about Christ, that would be the Hadith.
Is it to be understood or assumed that Muhammad wrote all of the Quran?
Wrote is a very tricky word here. So officially, God is the author of the Quran. So when you say who wrote the Quran, it's supposed to be God. But yeah, transmitted through Muhammad, that would be the official way of saying it.
Well, they say the same thing for the Bible. Moses wrote the Pentateuch. So Moses could not have been there before space-time, before the creation of the earth and the first humans. So therefore, God was sort of, grabbing Moses after the fact and saying, okay, here's what happened. And he sort of guided Moses' hand. It's that kind of thing with Muhammad and the Quran.
Kinda yes and no. In the Bible, what most Christians believe, it was inspired by God. God guided Moses, revealed to him in an ethereal sense. While in the Quran, Muslims believe that it is actually the literal words of God. It was verbatim. It's like a dictation. So God dictated every word and every letter of the Quran, not in the sense of inspiring some details and left the rest for the human touch. There is no human touch in the Quran.
And the Hadith, was that written in the same way, allegedly?
No, the Hadith is the actual sayings of the Prophet. So there is no dictation here. It's a chain of narration, and then the Hadith has massive classification. They call it actually the science of classification in Islam, where there is authentic Hadith, there is weak Hadith, there is somewhere in between semi-authentic. And it all comes down to the chain of narrators, who said what and in what way and to what level they were known to be accurate in repeating the Chinese whispers, if you wanna call it that way.
Sounds like the Bible too. Wait, now hang on. Like we've got the NIV Bible and the New American Standard and the King James and the New King James and all of these thousands of different variations. Any of that going on with the Quran, or is it one thing and you better not change it or we'll execute you kind of thing?
Absolutely. It's the same thing in the Quran. While the funny thing, Seth, I'm glad you asked that, because most Muslims will tell you that, no, actually the Quran, wherever you buy it, anywhere in the world, it's going to be exactly the same Quran. But this is absolutely not true. It depends where you buy the Quran from. There are two major copies. It's like the King James. The King James is the most known Bible everywhere in the world. So there is Hafs and Warsh for the Quran. These are two different versions of the Quran, and you will find them most spread. However, if you go to countries like Algeria or Iran or Yemen, you might get your hands on some interesting versions of the Quran. There is about, as far as I know, there is about somewhere between 27 to 33 different versions of the Quran.
You were born in Egypt, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
To a Muslim family?
No, I was born and raised Christian. I am a Coptic Orthodox Christian. Well, I was a Coptic Orthodox Christian.
What's a Coptic Orthodox Christian?
Coptic is the word, it's an ancient word for basically Egyptian, because you know how you say Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox? Usually the first word refers to a country or a geographic region, while the second word is the denomination of Christianity that I belong to. So Coptic basically means Egyptian, and Orthodox is Orthodox. So I'm Egyptian Orthodox Christian.
So if Islam is the predominant religion in Egypt, and you are in a minority faith, how are you treated?
Very interesting. Sorry. Let me think about how to answer that question.
Are you second class? Are you worried for your safety when you are walking the streets and someone sees? I don't know. Are you overtly Christian? Do you have Christian apparel, or in the States we have Christian markers that people like, whether it's the cross necklace or the crown of thorns tattoo. Let's say you're broadcasting your Christianity in the streets. What kind of a reception do you expect?
So funnily enough, I do have the Coptic Christian tattoo. I'm not sure if it is visible on my wrist here, but this is something most Coptic Christians in Egypt would have at a very young age. I had this tattoo when I was 12 years old. It's kind of our way of putting the faith on our in a visible way. It's kind of revealing your identity in a way. And it's funny because when you say, are you a second-class citizen or are you treated differently? Well, it depends on the context and who's treating you. Are you dealing with a government organization? Are you talking about down the street, dealing with everyday people? Let's put it this way. In many, many occasions, I was always on edge and not sure of the person treating me, whether that is the guy selling me stuff in the shop or just the next door neighbor, whoever it is. You always have this sense of, I'm a second-class citizen, and it depends on the person in front of me how they will treat me. I don't know that. So you always have your guards up in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It totally makes sense.
There's a couple of other things funny about Egypt, is that one thing, even if you don't have the cross tattooed on your hand, your name could very well reveal your religion. If your name is Michael or Girgis or Paul, you're surely is Christian. If your name is Ali or Muhammad or any other Muslim, you're surely Muslim. So sometimes your name will just reveal your religious affiliations. And the last thing is it's also on your ID card. That's also unique to Egypt. I'm not sure if it is in any other Arab country or not, but if a policeman stops you and asks for the ID, on your ID card, it says if you are Christian or Muslim.
Are you allowed to put no preference, no religion on your ID in Egypt?
There is no such thing. You're either Christian or Muslim, or Jew, but I've never seen it on any ID. But you're allowed technically. Okay,
so with the name Adam Elmasri, are you named after the biblical Adam? I mean, would that give you away?
Well, in a way, yes. Adam is a very common name in Egypt. Well, in the whole Middle East. So yes, I'm named after the great Adam.
So I'm going to ask you the obvious next question that I ask all heathen activists or even humanist activists. You had a deconstruction because you're helping others, but how did you get out of the faith?
It was my own faith crisis, I think, about 10 years ago. It's always hard to answer that question, Seth, because you never go to bed one Tuesday night thinking you're Christian, and then you wake up Wednesday morning, I'm like, I'm not anymore. So I guess I went through a phase of doubts and questioning myself, and I read a lot, and it was very, very troubling, and it was an inner turmoil that led me eventually to join a very reputable university in Australia to do a degree in biblical studies and textual criticism, mainly for my own benefit, because I didn't want to leave my faith coming from a place of ignorance. So I really wanted to throw myself into more knowledge. And by the end of that degree, I openly declared myself agnostic. And from there, different things led me in different ways.
Were there consequences for you? Family, friends, your social circle?
Massive consequences. The first thing is I was excommunicated. I lost my entire social circle because my whole life was entrenched in the church. So overnight, I didn't have any friends at all, zero friends. It also led into my divorce. So I was married at the time when I had my faith crisis. And then eventually that led to a divorce. I had some hiccups with my family, mom and dad and brother. They are all living in Australia, and it took some time to restore the relationship with them. And luckily for me, it eventually got to the point that they just accepted who I am, and it's my own personal journey. There was no shunning, but there was, that they always have this idea that you probably read a couple of books that messed with your head. So we will convince you once we just, if you come and sit with bishop such and such or priest such and such, they will restore your faith. But more and more they realize that I know more than they can, than they can restore, I guess.
It's interesting how these cultures like to pinball toward authority with a capital A, because I had the same thing. I'm coming out and I'm realizing that 2 + 2 did not actually equal 5. And that all this stuff doesn't make sense. And people started throwing names, apologists, books. Someone asked me to attend an apologist seminar because they have, a theology degree somehow. Even before they heard him speak, they knew he would speak the truth, and perhaps I might learn the truth. They lean into these authorities, and personal thinking seems to shut down. I don't know. Have you noticed that, Adam?
I do. And I had this dual understanding. I could see for the first time how I saw these people are just mere humans after all, while my family still thought of them as holy figures. They are the bearers of light. They are the bearers of truth. So it was very interesting at that time because I just came out of the faith. I held these people at some point in my life as holy people and the bearer of truth. And if I needed to ask about anything, I would go to the priest or to the bishop or whoever it is. Now I'm going to an academic, and I'm going to university to secular academics to get my answers from. And it was at that time that I started seeing, wow, my worldview has changed, and I'm seeing things for the first time completely different from my family.
It's funny how we are so conditioned to respond, to give extra equity to somebody who begins with the introduction, reverend, pastor, minister, at least in the United States. And I tell this story, forgive me if you've heard it, everybody who is watching and listening, but Free Flow, the Florida Free Thought Convention in Orlando, is having its convention. And there was a Friday night costume party. And I went as a priest. And so I got a very authentic priest outfit. And I wore it out of my hotel room and got into the elevator, went all the way down, walked through the lobby, down the corridors, and to the party. Well, on my way, you should have seen how people deferred to me. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what my degree might have been in. I could have been a serial killer, a child molester. They have no idea. But I walk into the elevator and everybody's raucous and they're all swapping stories and laughing. And they went stone quiet and almost looked at the floor. Reverence toward me. Someone asked me if a patron had died in the hotel and I was there to perform like last rites. I thought to myself, the power that the clerics hold, just perceptions of credibility. Jim Palmer is a guy who he's not religious but spiritual, and he and I have our disagreements, but he says a lot of interesting and sometimes really good stuff. But he says, somebody who has a pastoral title has no real credibility, is not more credible than anybody else. I don't know, I'm babbling. Adam, do you have any thoughts on the imams and the clerics and the pastors and the reverends?
I probably will say exactly what you just said. It's so funny how especially in the Middle East, like you're describing how it is in America. In the Middle East, it's multiplied by 10. How these people are very much regarded at a higher level. But since you're talking about your friend as well, who is spiritual but not religious, I went through that phase when I came out. As I said, it's like morphing. It's not like, I know I said by the end of my degree, I openly declared myself agnostic, but there was a phase in between where I couldn't be completely spiritually naked in a way. I needed something to hang on to. So I went out of Christianity, hanging on to some spiritual elements out there before I really could have the guts to declare myself agnostic or agnostic atheist, whatever you call it.
I think it makes total sense. I always say that you're in the center of the bullseye, which is high control religion, fundamental literalist, Bible, Quran literalist. But you start to doubt and you take the next step. Well, the Bible is partially true, or some of it's metaphor. And then before you know it, you take the next step and you say, well, it's not a religion. I don't really need the Bible. I love Jesus. And then maybe you take the next step and say, well, Jesus may have been God, but he had some good things to say, and blah, blah, blah. And then you end up near the end. And the next steps are, there may be no God. That's terrifying. And it's totally understandable why people would pause there in this nebulous area of, well, I think there's something out there. And I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I think that's a position of safety because for many, the next steps are pretty scary. And in your work as a secular therapist, you probably see a lot of that. I'm terrified to go the distance. I think maybe I'll just sort of sit here in the neutral zone, right? Totally.
Yeah. And this is the huge difference you find between Adam the activist and Adam the secular therapist. Because Adam the activist, Adam on YouTube, on my YouTube channels, I promote critical thinking. I challenge scriptures, and I basically debunk a lot of beliefs on my channel. But when it comes to therapy, my role is not to debunk anything or challenge anything. My role is actually to meet the person where they're at, and it's a completely different position, and it requires a lot of discipline, because at that point you're basically trying to validate where this person is at. You're trying to assure them that they're not going insane for doubting. They have every reasonable reason to doubt how they're doubting and where they're at. And I get all sorts of different people. Some people who want to leave Islam and embrace Christianity. Some people who want to leave the religion altogether. So yeah, it's an interesting world where you do the work as a religious trauma therapist.
Speaking here with Adam Elmasri, he is a former religious person, and he is helping people in their own journeys. 2 YouTube channels, are they echoes of each other? I mean, do you do a version of one video in English and then it's the same content in Arabic?
No, I started the Arabic channel about 7 or 8 years ago, and when I started it just because I wanted to share my experience with others. I wanted to find like-minded people who had a similar journey to mine, and it was my way to connect and share my 2 cents worth. Little that I knew at the time that it will grow into over 100,000 subscribers, 120 now, I guess, 15 million views. It grew beyond my expectations. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I realized that, hang on a second here. Yes, while I'm doing this work in Arabic, there is a huge gap in the English-speaking world, specifically to understand Islam from an Arabic-speaking person. So the material that I present on both channels are in a way completely different. I focus on certain topics on the Arabic channel that is suited for the Arabic speaker, while in the English world, I try to present my arguments in slightly different way, more focused on Islam and more suited to the Western world.
Sure, I understand. I mean, we're a different audience. You have to, I think, condition us. You have to educate us in a different way. From your perspective, do people, doubters, even apostates, atheists in high control, let's say one of the 13 Islamic nations, right, with Islamic governments, do they have access to your channel? Are they down in the basement looking you up online and watching you and then secretly reaching out?
It depends who the person and which country they come from. So I can tell you that there are some people, let's say in Egypt, a lot of people are just watching me in the privacy of their own bedroom or office. Usually my videos are watched in private because no one is open about their current state of belief. But then you have a country like Afghanistan, for instance. This is a country that officially I received a number of emails from YouTube saying that a government body in Afghanistan has requested for this video to be banned in their country. And I have about 50% of my channel banned in Afghanistan. Yet I receive messages from people from Afghanistan saying, well, don't worry, brother, we will use VPN, or we found ways to browse your videos and still watch you through the VPN. So it depends how tech savvy the person is. It depends what country and what length they go to ban your material.
So you do videos pointing out things like mistakes in the Quran. And then what? Do you go down to your bunker and lock the door because, people have declared war on you? Do you worry about your safety? I always have to ask this to people taking on Islam. Do you worry about somebody who's going to exact Allah's justice against your physical body?
I have to be honest, there is a level of concern, yes. Not to the level that I'm worried looking over my shoulder all the time, but I received death threats. I received emails and messages from lawyers in Egypt saying that under the blasphemy law, they filed cases against me in the court. So one thing, I'm unable to go and visit my home country. I cannot go to Egypt because if I go to Egypt, I'll probably be arrested in the airport. I never had the opportunity to be 100% sure if there are cases against me or not, but according to the messages that I received, there are cases against me in the court under the blasphemy law. I have reached out to the Australian Federal Police a couple of times to report death threats that I received. But that's more out of being wise and being cautious in a way. I try to stay private. I'm not living in a bunker or anything.
You're not crawling to the car in the prone position.
No.
Looking all, okay. So I open that can of worms, mistakes and misstatements, myths and lies in the Quran. Uh-oh. I'm going to have to ask for some examples because I always heard the Quran was perfect, the perfect word of Allah. What are we talking about?
I can't remember what I presented in that particular video, but I can tell you a lot of mistakes in the Quran. Specifically, there are historical mistakes, there are scientific mistakes in the Quran. It really depends. I can give you one example of each if you wish.
Sure.
So one good example, since I am from Egypt, there is a verse in the Quran where Pharaoh is calling someone named Haman, and he's asking him to bake bricks to build a massive tower to go up in the skies and find out about the God of Moses. So Pharaoh was apparently jealous from the God of Moses and wanted to build a tower using baked clay to reach the heavens. And in that video, I'm arguing that if only the author of the Quran knew that the ancient Egyptians never built high rises and high towers using baked clays, ABC engineering would say that the baked clay or the baked bricks will crumble under the heavy weight of the structure. So the Egyptians knew that, but the author of the Quran didn't know that. And of course, I get all sorts of apologetic responses trying to say, well, you're trying to say that Egyptians didn't use baked clay or baked bricks. I'm like, that's not the argument. The argument, I never said that Egyptians didn't use baked clay, but they never used it in high rises specifically. If the author of the Quran knew that the pyramid, one stone in the pyramid weighed about 5 tons, wouldn't have said such a verse. So that is one historical error in the Quran. A scientific error in the Quran, and again, there's a lot of refutations and apologetic refutation attempts and apologetic response about how a character in the Quran named as Dhul Qarnayn apparently went to the far edges of the earth and found the place where the sun sets, and it was setting in murky waters. And while it's very clear scientific error, again, people try to refute it and say, well, it appeared to Dhul Qarnayn in his eyes, in the way he saw it, that it was setting in murky waters, but that's not what the Quran is saying. And again, I don't know to what length you want me to present the arguments and the refutations and the responses.
Oh, it sounds just like the Christianity apologists. If it happens to line up with history, it verifies the Bible. If it doesn't, it's a mistranslation, misinterpretation, metaphor, or the science and historians are all colluding to, try to kill God. I don't know. It's silly putty. They can just sort of mash it into whatever they want. Doesn't the Quran say, and I'm doing this from memory and it's early and I need more coffee, but doesn't it say the origin story of humankind is the first human was harvested from a clot of blood instead of Adam and dirt? Was it a clot of blood in the Quran?
You're it's yes and no. It doesn't necessarily talk about Adam as the first human, but it talks about how humans are created in the womb. And yes, it says that all human beings, they start from being a clot of blood in the womb, which is absolutely wrong.
You should never get your science from superstition books. This is just, but when you bring these contradictions and problems and morality issues to Muslims, given the fact that I think, as I'm to understand it, most Muslims are like most Christians. They're scripture illiterate, and they'll parrot a few cherry-picked things, maybe even chanting them. I've heard a lot of Muslims do this. It's almost like listening to a parrot, an apologist parrot, where they've just got this thing and God is good, Allah be great kind of thing. Does it make a dent with anybody when you point this stuff out?
I have to say, Seth, that I found Muslims to be much more literate about their books, more than Christians. It's often the case that you would reveal a verse in the Bible and a Christian believer wouldn't have a clue, or that it's the first time they heard this verse. But it's hardly the case with Muslims. Perhaps that's because part of the Islamic faith is to memorize the Quran. So most of them, whether they understand it fully or not, that's a different question. But they do remember the verses, and sometimes you get this stoned face where they heard the verse before, they recited it a million times before, but they never really pondered upon the meanings. And the moment you reveal something, they're like, no, you got it wrong. The first point of attack is that you're not an Arabic speaker. And once I revealed that, no, actually, I was born and raised and grew up in Egypt. I am an Arabic speaker. They're like, you're not understanding it correctly. And you get into a different type of argument.
So if they read the story of Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old and then molesting the child at 9, if we're to be honest, many people are quoting that, but they're not really they're not scratching past the surface. And perhaps you have the conversation that causes them to consider what they just have been parroting in the past. And then they have that moral dilemma. Would that be an example of what you're talking about?
Not with this particular example, because this particular story about Muhammad marrying a child has been exhausted over and over. And it's kind of, there is this level of stubbornness to see the argument. Funny that you raised that, because literally today I was watching a video by a Muslim apologist known as Ali Dawah, and he was talking about this. He lives in the UK, and most of his work is in the UK. And he was arguing that what did the Prophet do wrong if in the UK, in Britain, Great Britain, 100 years ago, if you read the law, and he presented, I cannot repeat what he said verbatim, but he was arguing that in the UK, child marriage was allowed up to 100 or 150 years ago, and the minimum age was 12 years old or something like that. So he says, if you go back and see it in the context of the time that it happened, the Prophet didn't make anything wrong. This is a very, very famous and well-known argument. So this is not the example that I would get people having an aha moment or being shocked. Most of my arguments are around areas related to other things like women's rights in Islam, things related to female genital mutilation, marital rape, inequality under the justice system. These are the things that the average Muslim probably never heard about or have minimal knowledge around it.
Is child marriage epidemic in Islam-dominant nations and even beyond in Islamic culture? Child marriage, something beyond the fringes?
It is, but then you get the contradiction. It's such a cognitive dissonance, because if you look at a country like Egypt, for instance, child marriage is illegal by the law. However, it's happening right, left, and center. And you will find marriage celebrants and you will find people to do the work, and you can register the marriage, and you can forge the age of the child, and you can go about it completely legal, despite the fact that it is illegal in the books of law. So is it an epidemic? Yes, it is. But at the same time, someone can argue that how it is an epidemic when the country is actually considering it unlawful.
Speaking here with ex-Christian and human rights activist Adam Elmasri, you have a video that's titled "The Quran's Biggest Mistake in Saying Jesus is the Messiah." Again, I need you to educate me. I always thought that the Quran presented Jesus as just another prophet and not the Messiah.
No, the Quran keeps referring to Jesus as the Messiah, and that's exactly what you just said is the problem in the Quran. How can the Quran refer to Jesus constantly as the Messiah, son of Mary, when it doesn't really understand or endorses the concept of what Christ really means?
Okay, well, let me make sure I'm understanding. So the black and white verses of the Quran use Messiah, but Islam as a culture doesn't treat Jesus as the Messiah?
So the concept of Messiah in both Judaism and in Christianity is around salvation, bringing salvation. Whether in the Jewish context that salvation is earthly salvation, or in the Christian theology where the salvation became more of a spiritual salvation and restoring the relationship between man and God. But Christ, or the Christ, was that anointed figure that is supposed to come and have salvation for humanity, restore world peace and all that jazz. The funny thing is that the Quran then comes and endorses Jesus being the Messiah, but at the same time denies his crucifixion. There is no salvation that came with Christ, and definitely no world peace that came with Christ. So under what basis exactly you're trying to tell me? I'm asking the Quran here. On what basis you're claiming that Jesus is the Messiah if you're refusing every context that he can be the Messiah, the Savior?
Am I then to understand that Islamists revere Muhammad more than Jesus?
That's a slippery slope.
I mean, I know it's it's your perception, and you don't have to answer, Adam, but I never hear Muslims talk about Jesus because it's always about Muhammad, you know.
The Quran speaks of Jesus very, very highly and as the most regarded figure. However, in the minds of everyday Muslim, they think that Muhammad is the finest human being that came to earth, and definitely they revere him way more than anyone or anything else. You will find a very famous chanting in times of crisis in the Middle East. You will find a lot of people chanting "Fadaka abi wa ummi ya Rasulullah," which means, even my mom and dad, I consider a sacrificial to you, O Prophet. This is how they consider the Prophet.
Jesus, that's sobering. And mom and dad are raising an eyebrow going, uh-oh, sleep with one eye open because we might be sacrificed for the prophet. Let's pinball to your book. How did Christianity begin, really?
Think about the book as one of Bart Ehrman's books. It's all about how Christianity emerged from Judaism, how they came to form their books, how they came to form their theology, and the earliest sects or different denominations. There was no denominations officially at the time, but there were many, many different groups that believed different things, and they all called themselves Christians. And it's in the Western world, it's very common knowledge. But one of the reasons why I wanted to write that book is that, one, Bart Ehrman's books are not available in the Middle East. Two, there's hardly any of that material available in Arabic for the Christian communities in the Middle East. I'm talking about the communities that they cannot read English, and their English illiteracy in the Arab world is very common. So I wanted to produce something in Arabic on that topic. And it was in my own words and in my own knowledge as I learned things during my university years. And I did, as I mentioned earlier, my degree in biblical studies. I wanted to put that in an easy narrative to educate the average Arabic speaker.
Is there an English version or just in Arabic right now?
From my book? No, I haven't. I haven't translated it in English. And I thought one reason is that there are many, many famous and big authors who wrote on the topic, so I didn't feel the need for my book to be in English as well.
Sure, the need has already been met here. So now you're counseling, you're working with people who are deconstructing. What do they need? What are the trends you are hearing as people are doing what they do, finally asking questions or asking for permission to ask questions? What are you seeing out there, brother?
All sorts of things, not only as a therapist, but since I joined RFR, or Recovering from Religion, and since also Recovering from Religion has become an Australian organization as well. So now we have Recover from Religion Australia, and I started working with them a number of months ago, plus being on the Secular Therapy Project. Working with these two organizations, I should say, you find a lot of people with different needs, and the needs vary all the way from someone struggling with the mental capacity or the mental burden, I should say, from questioning their faith and losing their faith and all that, all the way to people who already made peace with the doubts and they already abandoned the religion, but they're struggling with the social aspect of it, the family shunning, the coming out. So you have an entire spectrum of how different people experience trauma. And one of the wonderful things that RFR, both globally and Australia, provide is the support groups for these people. Wherever you're at, whatever you're experiencing, there are other people who experienced similar feelings and similar questioning and doubt and trauma. You will find a lot of the LGBTQ communities who, because of their faith, they couldn't come out, or even when they come out, they struggle with their own sexual identity or sexual orientation. It's a huge spectrum, Seth, to talk about.
I know it's a broad question. I mean, you and I have both deconstructed. In my own journey, I was struck by how freeing it was that I was no longer being told who to judge.
Absolutely, you're spot on. And one, yes, I felt liberated and now accepting of everyone and their own experience. And one funny thing I say to my dad, who is still a practicing Christian church goer till today, whenever he talks to me about my experience, this is something I tell him all the time. It's so funny. What I tell him is, it is so funny, Dad, that I actually feel that once I abandoned Christianity, once I denounced Christianity, I became more Christian. And he looks at me puzzled, like, what do you mean? You became more Christian after you left Christianity? Well, excuse me? I'm like, yeah, well, if you consider Christianity as live like Christ, accept all, love people wherever they are, that's exactly how I'm living my life. If that is your definition of Christian, then I'm just living that. I just don't believe in all the fluff around it and the things that require me to believe. I just don't believe. I just love the people.
No magic required. And you don't have all the guilt and shame and high control baggage. And some people have said, well, wow, didn't your apostasy turn your life upside down? And I reply, actually, it kind of turned my life right side up, which is, I think, a better way to say it. Adam, you have a very soothing way about you. I can see if I would, look, I may just call you anyway. Despite the 17-hour time difference, maybe if I'm having a challenge, I'm just going to call you and let you soothingly walk me through whatever crisis I'm in, because you have a very gentle, calming demeanor about you. And I mean, you'd be the call I think I'd want if I was on that journey. If I ever get down there, I'm going to shake your hand and also give a big hug to my dear friend who works with RFR, Sherry D'Souza. She's just a precious, precious person. And really fast, give me your website. Tell people how to find you and your work, if you would.
Thank you. My website is, as my name is spelled on the screen, adamelmasri.online. And the way to find me online is basically, whether you go on Google or YouTube and you just type Adam Elmasri, you will find both my Arabic and English speaking channels. Whichever language you speak, you'll find a lot of material on there. I'm also on Instagram, on Facebook. So just Google Adam Elmasri and you'll find it all.
And I'll put the links in the description box. Now, if you and I were if we were in the Islamic faith, how would we end our exchange? Would we say assalamu or whatever it is? What would I say?
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum works both as a greeting to come in and to leave. You don't say L anymore. So you say assalamu alaikum, starting with the S. Assalamu alaikum. So
it sounds much more musical coming out of your mouth, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Adam Elmasri, it's an honor to be able to have this conversation. We've got our problems in the States. Obviously, the front burner, the wildfire is the looming death of democracy and decency under the shadow of Christian nationalists, etc. But Islam does remain a critical issue that we in the West need to be speaking about more. And so I'm honored to be given the opportunity to be able to use this conversation to signal boost that. I'm going to send everybody to your site and your channels and your work. And let's talk again soon, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I'm honored to be with you.